About a week ago, I did a video on the latest Nikon free editing software called NX Studio. And I stated this was a first impressions video because I'd never used the program before. But I just wanted to show people just a quick overview of this program and a few of the sliders and all that, just to get people going into this program. Because I think if you're just a weekend photographer and you don't want to outlay in a subscription of Adobe Lightroom or buy another program, this free software from Nikon is actually quite good. But like I stated, it was a first impressions video. And I'd really like to thank everybody that commented and watched this video. It's really helped me grow my YouTube channel. But I did get a bit of negative feedback, but I can understand that. I understand that not everybody is on the same page. But when it comes to Windows-based programs, people have to understand that not every system is the same. Some people might have had problems using NX Studio because of the software they had on, or there could have been a glitch on their system. But I stated on there that I couldn't see most of my files on my computer. Now some people said, well, they could see their files on their system, why couldn't I see on mine? Well, after I'd done a video, I started doing a bit of research and I found out that Nikon doesn't support if you convert your NEF files to DNG. And this is what I do. I started doing this about 2 years ago because I was doing work for companies that required me to actually convert my files from NEF to DNG, because I wasn't the only one working for them. They had people that were using Canon cameras, Sony cameras, and the requirement was that we convert all our RAW files to DNG format. Because I had to convert all the files that I was doing for companies to DNG format, I decided to convert my files as well to DNG format, just to make the process when I was importing to Lightroom the same. So I was sure that there would be never any stuff ups at all. And this is why I couldn't see many of my files, because all the newer files from like 2 years ago are all in DNG format. And I will show you this now very quickly in NX Studio. So here you can see a folder, and we can see we have Shipwreck JPEG, Shipwreck NEF, Shipwreck TIFF, Sunrise JPEG, Sunrise TIFF, and Waterfall NEF. Now, NX Studio will read JPEGs from the camera, and if you've edited the image in your computer, convert it to a TIFF file, it will actually read the TIFF file. But you can see in the Sunrise, there is no NEF associated with that. That is because it was converted to a DNG, and I'll show it to you now. So here you can see we have Shipwreck JPEG, Shipwreck RAW, Shipwreck TIFF. Here you can see Sunrise. The Sunrise image was converted to a DNG. Then we have JPEG, TIFF, and then the Waterfall in RAW, which is NEF. And this is why I actually stated that I couldn't see my photos. Now, at the time that I did the video, I didn't know that NX Studio did not support DNG files. I know Nikon is aware of this, and I hope that in the future they bring an update to actually support the DNG conversion, so that we can actually edit our DNG files that were taken with a Nikon camera in this program, because that would be so beneficial to so many people. Before we jump in, understand that if you shot in RAW and in JPEG in your camera, that you can also touch up your JPEG image in NX Studio, but some of the functions are actually disabled. And I'll show you this before we actually start editing our waterfall image. So let's jump into it now. So here are images, and before we go into the photos, I'll actually show you a bit about the real estate. Now, the cool thing about this program is we have all our editing functions on the right, and we have our basically our computer hard drives and all that on the left, where we can see all our stuff that's on our computer. And these can actually be shrunk, expanded on either side, and if you don't want this side, you can actually collapse it down, which gives you more real estate room. And the same on this side here, you can actually shrink it down or expand it. This is actually quite good because when you expand it like this, if I just come up here, let's say to exposure compensation, you can see that the slides are very big. If we shrink it down, can you see that the slide is actually much smaller? So having it expanded like that means that it is much easier to actually do a fine adjustment. Up the top here we have adjustments, info, and MXP IPTX. So this is where you can actually write stuff in. So let's say if I click on my waterfall pick here, I can actually click on, let's say, waterfall in Sunshine Coast hinterland. Hinterland. There. So now, in the description, in the metadata, this will actually be saved. That it'll come up the description, this is it. I can also add keywords, just like in Lightroom. So I click on the plus button, I can click waterfall, twilight, because this was taken. I can click on the date, which was, I think, 2018, and so on. So this is all about similar that you can do in Lightroom. You can also, up here in the ratings, so you can tag your photo. So if you think that this is one of your best photos, like it has a 5-star rating, you can come up here and tag it 5-star. And look, down the bottom here you can see it's been tagged 5-star. You can also color code your images. You can put labels on them. See, so I could put like a red, I could put a blue. You can do a lot of things if you actually want to do it just like in Lightroom. Just spend a bit of time going through this program and you'll find there's quite a bit of stuff. And for a free program, I actually find that it is quite good. You can't expect something like Lightroom when you're not paying anything for it. So I really give my hat off to Nikon because they've really put a bit of effort into this. It's got a few drawbacks, but it's still pretty good. Now, as we start editing the waterfall pick, you'll actually see sometimes the system takes a bit of time to catch up. And this is what I found, that it is a bit sluggish. So it takes a bit of time to catch up to what you're actually editing. So take your time when you're using sliders and all that, because sometimes it will actually take like a couple of seconds for it to catch up. Now, before we edit this, I said I was going to show you a bit on the JPEG. I come back up here to adjustment. If I come up here to the shipwreck JPEG, look, I cannot touch picture controls, I cannot touch white balance, I cannot touch exposure compensation or active delighting. This is because if you're shooting in JPEG, you should set up your Nikon camera to what you want in here. You should set up your picture control properly, your white balance properly. So you should do this, and I've done a video on picture controls for Nikon cameras, how to use them up here. And if you've never used picture controls, you should look at them, because if you're shooting in JPEG, you can actually get quite a lot of editing done through the picture controls for your JPEG images inside your camera. I believe when you take a JPEG image, it's the finished product. So I actually tried to get my JPEG image as close to what I want. So if I find the white balance is wrong, I adjust it in camera. Some of these functions on the editing side can be adjusted just when you click like this. But the best way to do it is actually double click on your image. That way all the features are enabled. Because if you're just touching on the thumbnail, only some of the editing functions are available. So double click on your image all the time. So we'll double click on the image. There we go. So this image was taken with my Nikon D750 at twilight. And you can see the image is quite dark. But there is so much detail in this image that you'll see when we start editing it, we'll actually see all the foreground. The first thing I do is I can come up here to picture controls, and you can see here it says the recorded value, so the value that was set in camera was vivid, but I can change that to landscape, because this is how I actually set up my camera now. I don't use vivid anymore. I found that vivid, after a while I realized that it was giving me a too saturated and too contrasty image, so I've changed and I now use landscape picture control. And this is all I do. I don't touch any of the other settings. Now, can you see here this little yellow tick box? This is so cool because every feature that you touch on down on the side here if you adjust it, it'll come up with a yellow tick box. So you can easily see which sections that you've actually modified. If after a while you actually want to see what does this image look like if I take exposure compensation off, if I stop the levels and curves adjustments, you can just unclick these settings and it will show you what the image looked like beforehand. So first things first, we'll actually use exposure compensation to bring up our image. In Lightroom, it's just called exposure. You've just got the exposure slider. In NX Studio, it's exposure compensation. They do the same thing. So we'll just slide the slider to the right. And you can see like the tick box has come up. I will slide it up. That's it. I know I'm going to lose a bit of the highlights in the middle here, but I'll slide it up. Not too much. About here. Cool. Now, I don't know if you've ever read about active delighting, but if you use active delighting, you'll find that it is such a cool feature to have, because what active delighting does is it tries to find a balance between your very dark shadows and your bright highlights. So it tries to come with a balance in between. So it can pull out some of the shadows, bring down some of your highlights, but it's a two-edged sword, so you have to be very careful how you use it. I normally set active delighting on my Nikon cameras to normal. It doesn't affect the raw file, it only affects your JPEG. But when you look on the back LCD screen, what you're seeing is the edited JPEG image. So if you've got active delighting, it'll actually show you what the image could look like with that function turned on. So we click on active delighting, original value. You can see on this one it was turned off. We'll come up to normal. And look, can you see that it dulled down? I'll unclick it and look, watch the highlights. Watch the highlights around here. Click it. Can you see that it's dropped the highlights? Now, look down the bottom here in the shadows and we'll click it again. There. Can you see how it's actually pulled out some of the shadows as well? Now, you can try if you want. For this image, if I go all the way to high, can you see how it's actually even pulled out more of the shadows? So it's actually trying to even it up because it can analyze that between my highlights and the shadows there is such a big difference that it's trying to find a neutral point. So this is quite good. Now we click on the next one. So we won't touch the brightness because we've already adjusted our exposure. I can add a little bit of contrast to the image, not too much. I won't touch the saturation yet because I really can't see too much detail. I actually will probably come back to the saturation right at the end because I can't see too much. So there's no need to adjust saturation in anything until I have a better visualization of my image. Now, if we see here, we have highlight protection, shadow protection, and delighting HS. Highlight protection and shadow protection in Lightroom would just be your highlights and your shadows. In Lightroom, for your highlights, if you want to drop your highlights down, for example, let's say if you've got puffy clouds, you want to see more of the puffy clouds, you would reduce the highlight slider. Here, you don't reduce it, you increase. So it's highlight protection. The more you increase it, the more you can actually control that bright highlight. And in the shadows, it's the same thing. If you want to bring your shadows up, you increase it. So increase our highlight protection. If we increase it too much, what we end up with in the middle here, we end up with like a very sharp gradients, and you don't want that. So I'll bring it back down. I want some, but I'll bring it to 50. That looks pretty good. Now the shadow protection, watch what happens as I slide it up here. Look at that. Can you see how good this is? I really feel that this is quite a good program. For me, the only drawback is that it can't read DNG files, but that's not a big deal. You know, like some people don't convert their DNG files. So if you're just using NEF files, your raw files, this is really good. Now also, I can get so much information out of this image because it was taken with the Nikon D750, and this camera was known to be so good in low light conditions. And this is why I bought it, because at that time I was doing a lot of astrophotography workshops and I wanted a camera that was great at night photography. But this is why I can actually pull out so much shadows without losing too much detail. The Nikon camera you use mightn't be as good, but this gives you an idea of how much you can actually draw from an image. So we'll take it up a little bit more. Now we'll use the delighting a little bit as well, and look at that. Look how much we're actually pulling out. Great. Now I can actually see, if you look here on the rocks here, it's a little bit soft, but that's understandable because we're just pulling out so much detail and we've lost a little bit of that sharpness in the rock edges. So I can come up here to the contrast and just add just a little bit of contrast, not too much. There, that's very good. Now I can come up to my saturation because I can see the image much better. So increase the saturation. So cool. There. Now we come up to levels and curves. Now levels and curves, when I actually teach Lightroom workshops to people who have never used Lightroom before, I actually bypass this because most of the time you don't need to be using levels and curves. If you're used to using levels and curves, by all means use it, but I find that most of the time you can actually bypass levels and curves just by using all the other sliders. But I'll show you how to use levels and curves anyway. So left hand side of the levels and curves is your shadows and the right is your bright area, your highlights. So watch what happens if I go halfway down and I bring down the levels. Can you see that it's my shadows that are coming down? And if I increase it, I'm actually increasing the shadows. And if I grab up here to the highlights, decrease the highlights, can you see now that I'm actually decreasing the brighter areas in the image? But this is the cool part here. Can you see this slider here? Now because I've adjusted this, watch what happens when I slide this slider either way. They're linked together. So now whether I slide one way or the other, both of them move in unison. I'll lift it, slide it a little bit this way. That's it. That looks really good. Now the next one is your colors. So here we can actually adjust the intensity of greens, yellows, reds, blues. So we've got a bit of greens here. If I want to adjust the intensity of the greens to saturation point, I can just lift up. If I lift it down, it actually reduces the saturation. I'll hold it there. It reduces the greens. I can do it to the blues, and you watch the sky. Can you see the sky's actually gone blue, and I can really sort of go overboard now and it just looks yuck. So I'll just bring it back down a bit, bring the greens down a little bit, bring everything back to zero. But I can see here that because I've adjusted the curves, can you see we've got like a ghosting pattern on the side around the trees here? So, and here, if you're not happy with any of these sliders you've adjusted, see this box here, it says reset all channels. So if I click on there, it's reset everything. If we were just adjusting the blue channel, I could click up here and I want just blue. I could come up here, we have RGB. If I click on the blue, now what I'm adjusting here is just the blue channel, no other color. So if I have adjusted separately the blue, the greens and the reds, and I'm not happy with the blue, I can just reset the blue and leave the reds and the greens alone. We'll leave it at that. Now, the next one here is color booster. So this is like vibrance. You can actually boost your colors, and it gives you an option. Is this a people's image, like a portrait, or nature? I'm going to click on nature, and now when I slide it, it's actually going to boost the colors according to the image, and this actually is starting to look quite good. So the next one is noise reduction. We click on it, we have faster, better quality, or better quality 2013. Now I tell people, when we use noise reduction in whatever software, whether it be Lightroom, NX Studio, or your preferred editing software, that you have to be very careful, because what happens with noise reduction is that if you can imagine that each pixel in your image is a hexagon, the more that you use the slider for noise reduction to increase that noise reduction, you're actually taking the corners off your pixel. So if you slide it all the way to 100, you're actually going to end up with a round pixel. And what happens with round on round? You've got a lot of dead areas around there. They're not going to lock in properly. This is, for me, the easiest way I can explain to people why the image looks very soft. Because now if they're all circles and you've got a lot of empty space around them, they don't lock in properly. So be very mindful of that when you're using the noise reduction. It was quite dark, so we'll actually just increase the luminance a bit. We won't touch the sharpness. The next one, we have sharpness adjustment, and this is where you can actually increase the sharpness in your image. So we can actually just increase the sharpness a little bit. This will actually give us a little bit more detail here. The rest here, I'm not going to go into it. You can have a play with it, the few down the bottom here, because I can see the time is ticking by and I don't want this video to be overly long, because I actually want to show something right up the top here that is a cool feature. Now look, oh, we haven't even adjusted our white balance. Sorry. So we'll click on the eyedropper for the white balance, and you can see the eyedropper's coming around in our image here. Now when you're using the eyedropper is colorblind. It's not looking at color. What you're telling the eyedropper is you're going to select neutral gray. That's what it's looking for. So if you click it on green, it's going to adjust your image terribly if you click it on blue or whatever. So if you're going to use the eyedropper, try to find an area in your image that is neutral gray. So I can look down the bottom here, the bottom right hand. See this area here? This looks fairly close to neutral gray. I'll click on it. And it's hardly made a difference because I adjusted my white balance fairly well. But if I come up here, I can actually use the gray point, or look at all the settings that I can have. I can have auto, calculate automatically. If I click calculate automatically, it's just warmed it up slightly. You can choose whatever you want here. If you want to warm up your image, you can choose cloudy. See, it's added a bit of warmth to the image. I actually quite like this because at the end of the day there was just a little bit of warmth. Now I could actually see this, but the camera could, because the camera's dynamic range can't see as much of our eyes. Now this actually looks quite good, but I'll just cool it down just that fraction. There, that's it. I'm really happy. Now the last two functions I want to show you, it's a bit hard here to show, but if you've got a crooked horizon, you come up here to this one. Use the straightening tool to straighten your image. I select a point on the right side of my image, draw a point. Now let's say our horizon was tilted like this. You can see like, so let's say it was like this and we click it there. Can you notice it's actually skewed it? But we actually told it that it was leaning, and it actually straightened that line that I drew. So I'll actually come back and reset it. There, perfect. You can just see there's a walking track across here. So this time all I did was just line up the walking track and it straightened my image up. So I've zoomed in, and if I use this tool here, this is the spot removal tool. So I click on it. Now I don't have any spots here, but I'll just show you what happens. So if you've got a dust spot, let's say here where I'm circling, all we can do is brush it there, and then it would actually remove that spot that you see there. Now the next tool I want to show you is, and I'll click on this tool here. Now there is no radial filter brush tool in NX Studio, but we do have a tool that is very similar to the radial filter. Watch what happens here when I click on it. Now this is the size. Can you see this circle drawing? So I can actually grab this circle here and I'll bring it to the bottom here, expand it. Can you see I can actually decrease the brightness? It's taking a bit of time. Or increase the brightness. But what I will do is I'll actually decrease the brightness a little bit, add a bit of contrast. I can add some saturation. I'll actually decrease the brightness a little bit more. Cool. Now, this is what I like doing sometimes to images, because this area should be a bit darker than the rest of the image, because my camera is pointing down. This area here with the rock is hardly getting any of that late twilight light. So having that area a bit darker, it sort of leads your eye in. You can see that it's actually different colors, different brightness levels, so your mind's saying, oh okay, well that's alright, because this is the darker part of the image. There's hardly any light down there, so there's no need to have it very bright. I can use this tool if I wanted to in the sky here, so I unclick, re-click it again, and this bright area here, now I can actually make it bigger or smaller, put it exactly where I want it here. Now I can actually reduce the brightness a little bit, reduce the contrast just to soften it up. That's it. So it's actually just taken a little bit of that hard edge away right in the center of the image. So this image is finished. Before I export the image, I'll actually quickly come up the top here. Can you see up here we have File, Edit, Browser, Image, Adjust. If you're not happy with everything that you've done, you can actually revert back to the original state of the image. So you go up here to Adjust, all the way down here at the bottom we have Revert to Original State. So if you click on that, it will actually revert back to what the raw file was before we did any editing. So now we will click on Export our image, and here you can select what format you want. JPEG, TIFF, we click JPEG. Here you can actually select the quality, whether you want it 100%, 50% or whatever, and you can also select the size of the image that you want. So this is just set to 2048 because in the first video when I used this program I stated that for Facebook this was the perfect size. The long edge being 2048 pixels will give you a very good resolution on Facebook. And I'll click on where I want this image to be saved, which is in Photos 2. Click Select, we click Export. You can see down here it's exporting it. So this is our edited image of the waterfall, and this is our raw file. Look how much detail we've actually gotten from this program, from this raw file. So I hope now that you have a better understanding and an insight of how to use NX Studio to its maximum capabilities. It has a few flaws. It's a little bit sluggish at times, but for a free program, it does very good. There are so many features in this program that really, if I was just a weekend photographer, I probably would just use this program because it just does about everything that a weekend photographer would want. Now, I'm not sort of looking down on weekend photographers. I was a weekend photographer for a long time, and maybe one day I'll just go back to being just a weekend photographer. But for the time being, I actually do quite a lot of outside work, and I enjoy that. But why pay, you know, $15 odd a month when you have a free program that can do, let's say, 75% of what Adobe Lightroom can do? I think it's quite good value, like value for money. It's a free program. Now, if you found value in this video, give me a thumbs up. I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I'll see you next time.